Ethan Caldwell had it all: wealth, power, and a name that commanded boardrooms. But after the sudden death of his parents, he was just a man drifting through grief. Until Lila entered his life. Gentle, grounded, and full of quiet light, she became his anchor. Their love was real. Their daughter, Ava, was perfect. Then, one day, they vanished. 7 years later, Ethan's empire is bigger, but his heart remains shattered. That is, until he sees a little girl scolded in a scrapyard, one who looks hauntingly familiar. When she turns and he glimpses a small birthmark behind her ear, the world stops. Could she be the daughter he thought was lost forever? What unfolds next is a gripping journey of betrayal, buried secrets, and redemption. Ethan's search for truth pits him against the one person he once trusted, his own uncle. As layers of deceit unravel, he uncovers a chilling past and races to save the one thing that still matters, his daughter. Stay with us to see how a man who had everything learns that love, not legacy, is the only thing worth fighting for. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It drizzled quietly over the slate roof of Caldwell Manor, a sprawling estate just outside Seattle, where wealth touched everything except the man sitting alone by the window. Ethan Caldwell, 35, billionaire heir to a real estate empire, stared out across acres of pine and glass with the stillness of someone hollowed out by grief. His parents' funeral had been 2 weeks ago. An accident, a blown tire on the I-90. The details were mechanical, impersonal, but the aftermath wasn't. Their absence was a quiet, suffocating pressure that gripped his lungs every time he tried to breathe. He hadn't returned to his company's offices since the service. Let the board circle. Let the vultures speculate. Let the press write whatever they pleased. Ethan didn't care. That night, the silence was broken by the soft knock of his housekeeper, Maria. "Mr. Caldwell," she said gently, "there's someone here for the greenhouse assistant position. You asked me to keep it posted." He blinked. He had no memory of that. "I can turn her away," Maria offered, hesitating. "No," Ethan said quietly. "Let her in." Moments later, she appeared. Small frame, wind-blown hair, and eyes like polished amber. She wore a second-hand coat 2 sizes too big, the sleeves swallowing her fingers, and her boots dripped rain onto the marble floor. "I'm Lila Nguyen," she said softly. "I saw the listing. I know it's late. I can come back another time." Ethan studied her for a long moment. She didn't shift under his gaze. "The greenhouse is that way," he said finally, nodding past the hallway. "Let's walk." They moved through the manor in silence, the only sound the distant tick of an old grandfather clock and the muted crunch of gravel as they stepped through the side door into the gardens. The greenhouse glowed faintly through the mist, a haven of warmth and life. Inside, condensation fogged the glass walls. Vines climbed toward the roof, and planters overflowed with ferns, jasmine, and rosemary. Ethan paused beside an old wooden bench his mother once favored. "She used to come out here every morning," he said, almost to himself. "Said the plants listened better than people." Lila walked slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of a potted orchid. "She wasn't wrong," she said, her voice as soft as the petals. He turned. "Do you have experience with horticulture?" "A little. My grandmother raised orchids. I worked at a nursery back in Tacoma." He nodded. "You're hired." Lila blinked. "Just like that? You showed up in the rain. That's more than most people do." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker. Small, barely perceptible, but real. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition. Lila carried something quiet and familiar, like an old melody half remembered. She didn't press or fawn. She didn't try to offer sympathy. She simply existed, softly, presently, in the space beside him. That night, as she left through the front hall, he watched from the stairs above. Maria appeared beside him. "She's kind," Maria said. "Careful, but kind." Ethan said nothing, but the next morning he was up earlier than usual. At 7:00 a.m., he entered the greenhouse and found Lila already there, pruning the rosemary with deliberate hands. She looked up and smiled. Something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough for the sun to finally break through the clouds. The days bled together gently after that. Mornings began in the greenhouse, where the light slanted in through glass panels and warmed the air with a golden hue. Lila's laughter, quiet and melodic, filled the space as she worked. Ethan began to join her more frequently, not to tend plants, but simply to watch. Sometimes they worked in companionable silence. Other times he asked questions about jasmine root systems, or why she always whistled the same haunting melody when watering the violets. "That song?" she said once, brushing her hair behind her ear. "My mom sang it when I was little. I don't remember the words, but the tune stayed." Ethan smiled. "It suits you. Gentle, but strong." Their friendship formed not in dramatic bursts, but in soft glances, accidental brushes of hands, shared tea, and late-night conversations that drifted from memories to dreams. Lila never asked about his fortune or fame. She only asked how he was sleeping, whether he'd eaten, if he missed his parents. "I do," Ethan admitted one night on the porch, the stars blurred by the mist. "More than I ever thought possible." "They must have been proud of you," she said, her voice laced with quiet sincerity. He shook his head. "They were disappointed by who I didn't become." "I think," she replied after a long pause, "you're still becoming." It was that moment, the way she said it, not like a comfort but a truth, that changed something in him. A year later, Lila moved into the manor. It wasn't a grand announcement or orchestrated affair. One afternoon, Maria was replacing curtains in the east wing when she found a toothbrush next to Ethan's. Then came a small drawer full of Lila's sweaters, a second cup always on the counter, a note on the fridge that simply said, "Dinner's in the oven. Love, L." Lila never tried to take over the manor, nor did she try to erase the past. She simply added warmth. Throw pillows that didn't match the decor, a shelf of used novels beside the fireplace, small paper cranes tucked into flower pots. Ethan found himself smiling more, sleeping more, breathing, finally, without pain. And then came Ava. It was a rainy spring morning, almost exactly 2 years after Ethan had first seen Lila in that oversized coat. He was pacing outside the birthing room at Evergreen Medical Center, biting his thumb, when the doctor emerged and smiled. "She's perfect," the doctor said. "You have a daughter." Ethan's heart stumbled in his chest. When he walked into the room, Lila looked exhausted but radiant, her cheeks flushed and damp with tears. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in lavender. "Meet Ava," she whispered. The baby had a tiny birthmark behind her ear, shaped like a teardrop. She yawned and reached out a hand, her fingers impossibly small and curling instinctively around Ethan's pinky. "She's real," he said, his voice cracking. "She is," Lila smiled, "and she's ours." They brought her home to a nursery painted in soft yellows and creams. Ethan spent hours just watching her sleep, memorizing the rise and fall of her chest, the way her lips puckered in her dreams, the way she curled into Lila's chest like she already knew safety. He read her poems, played old records from his mother's collection. Once, when Ava was fussy, Lila handed her to Ethan and said, "Try singing." "I don't sing. You do now." And so, awkwardly at first, Ethan sang, off-key, cracked, soft. But Ava quieted, her eyes blinking slowly, and Lila looked at him with something more than love. It was reverence. He felt whole, more whole than he'd ever known possible. But far away, in an office lit by the dim glow of a desk lamp, Richard Caldwell watched a photograph taken by a private investigator. Ethan, holding Ava outside a coffee shop, smiling like a man with everything to lose. Richard's jaw clenched. He tossed the photo into a drawer and poured himself a scotch. "Enjoy it while it lasts, nephew," he muttered. The morning light filtered softly through the nursery curtains, dappling the walls with gold. Ethan stood by Ava's crib, still marveling, every day, at the small miracle sleeping soundly in her fleece onesie. Her fingers twitched as she dreamed, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that soothed the restless parts of his soul. He reached out and brushed her forehead gently, then turned to find Lila leaning in the doorway, arms folded, a sleepy smile on her lips. "Breakfast?" she asked. "In a minute," he said quietly. They kissed. It was natural now, like breathing. What Ethan didn't know was that would be the last morning he saw them both for years. That afternoon, he left for a brief meeting downtown. Something about a philanthropic board seat he didn't even want, but Lila had encouraged him to accept. "You need to let people see the man you are now," she'd said, her fingers brushing his knuckles with that unspoken faith she always carried. He didn't argue. The meeting was uneventful. A lunch followed, then a stop at the florist. He picked up lilies, her favorite. He even thought to grab extra baby wipes because he remembered they were running low. When he returned home, the house was silent. Too silent. He walked through the kitchen first, calling her name lightly. "Lila?" Then the living room, the study, up the stairs. The nursery door was ajar. Empty crib. No note on the fridge, no suitcase missing from the closet. Just an eerie stillness, broken only by the faint hum of the central air. Then he saw it. A plain white envelope propped on the piano, addressed in Lila's unmistakable handwriting. He opened it with trembling. "Take care of yourself." Lila, he read it twice, then again. His legs buckled and he dropped onto the piano bench, the letter crumpled in his hand. His mind reeled. There was no explanation, no goodbye, just a few cryptic lines that made less sense the longer he stared at them. "Better this way?" What way? Within hours, he had his legal team on alert. He contacted Sam, his private security director. He alerted nearby hospitals. He even reviewed security footage. Lila had left that morning with Ava strapped to her chest and a bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't take a car, didn't hail a cab. She simply walked down the street and vanished. The investigation yielded nothing. No credit card activity, no cell phone pings, no contact with friends or former coworkers. It was as if she had simply evaporated. Then came Richard, always appearing at the worst moments, like a vulture circling a wounded animal. "I warned you," Richard said, handing Ethan a manila folder. Inside was a printout of the insurance manifest for a missing emerald necklace, valued at over $2 million. A family heirloom. It had been in the house safe. Now, gone. "You think she took it?" Ethan asked, voice low, disbelieving. Richard shrugged. "What else explains it? She saw the opening. She knew your weaknesses, played you for a fool." Ethan slammed the folder shut. "Get out." "I'm trying to protect the family name, Ethan." "No, you're trying to bury what little hope I have left." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Even as Ethan spent the following weeks trying to track down Lila and Ava, he wrestled with the idea that maybe, just maybe, he'd been deceived. Maybe Lila had never loved him. Maybe she saw his grief and his money and played the part. Maybe Ava wasn't even his child. These thoughts tore at him like wild dogs. Eventually, he gave up the search. Not because he stopped caring, but because hope became too painful to carry alone. He withdrew from his social circles, cut business meetings to the bare minimum. He kept the nursery untouched. Every so often, he'd sit in there in the dark, the silence pressing in around him, remembering the way Ava's breath had sounded, or the way Lila hummed when she rocked her. He never told anyone, not even Sam or Maria, that he kept one of Ava's onesies folded in his pocket for almost a year. He'd reach for it whenever the silence screamed too loudly. And then, one morning, with his jaw clenched and heart hollow, he packed it away in a cedar box labeled L. For the world, Ethan Caldwell was still the billionaire, still the sharp investor, still the man who owned half the skyline. But inside, he was a man haunted by a love that vanished without reason and a child whose laughter still echoed in the walls of a nursery untouched by time. The years that followed became a blur of boardroom lights, glass towers, and calendar alerts. Ethan Caldwell, once known for his heartfelt vision and magnetic presence, became a mythic figure in the business world. Sharp, efficient, distant. Every photo of him in Forbes or Business Insider showed the same expression: composed, unreadable, hollow. To the outside world, he looked like the man who had it all. But behind closed doors, he lived with ghosts. Ethan moved from the family estate into a sleek penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. Everything was minimal: black leather furniture, chrome accents, not a single photograph on display. He worked 12-hour days, then sat in silence most nights, bourbon in hand, staring at the city skyline as if it owed him answers. He had boxed up every trace of Lila and Ava and locked it away in storage. But he could never quite throw the key away. Sometimes, especially when the rain tapped lightly against the windows, he swore he could still hear Lila singing, or Ava babbling in the next room. Ethan's employees respected him, but feared him. His voice had gained an edge. Meetings became terse. He didn't laugh anymore. He didn't date. And he didn't explain. The only thing he held on to was the little photo of Ava in her high chair, blue eyes sparkling, a smear of mashed banana across her cheek. He kept it in the top drawer of his office desk. No one ever saw it. But when the weight in his chest got too heavy, he'd open the drawer and just stare. And yet, even in his quiet agony, Ethan protected something sacred: Lila's memory. He never spoke poorly of her, never confirmed rumors. When tabloids occasionally dredged up stories about the missing emerald necklace or Lila's betrayal, Ethan would buy up the rights to the piece, kill it quietly, and move on. He was grieving her, even if he didn't know it yet. Richard, however, thrived in the shadows Ethan created. He rose in the company, positioning himself strategically, smiling at press conferences, schmoozing investors, whispering doubts about Ethan's emotional readiness behind closed doors. But every time he tried to overreach, Ethan, sharp and watchful, despite his pain, cut him off just in time. Still, Richard was patient. He knew all he needed was a crack, one moment of Ethan letting his guard down. And it was coming. One fall afternoon, almost 7 years after Lila vanished, Ethan's driver took a wrong turn en route to a real estate tour and passed through an impoverished stretch of Southside Chicago. Ethan glanced out the tinted window just as a woman shouted at a young girl hauling a bag of recyclables. "Move faster, or I'm keeping the money," the woman barked. The girl's shoulders stiffened. Her hands trembled. She bent to pick up a spilled can, and Ethan's heart stuttered. There, just beneath the girl's ponytail, was a small, crescent-shaped birthmark. Behind her ear, the same exact one Ava had. He bolted upright. "Stop the car," he said. The driver hesitated. Ethan snapped, "Now!" He opened the door before the car fully stopped and stepped into the grimy curbside. The girl had just turned the corner, dragging her bag along the sidewalk. He followed. She was taller now, lean and quick-footed, but something about the way she tilted her head as she moved, something about her energy, was unmistakable. "Excuse me," Ethan called, trying not to frighten her. She turned, cautious. Her eyes narrowed, and Ethan's world fractured. It was her. It was Ava. The same clear blue eyes, the same heart-shaped face, just older, tougher, guarded. He swallowed hard. Do you live around here?" She looked him over. "Why do you care? I think I might know your mother." "My mom died," she said flatly. 3 years ago. Car crash." Ethan's breath caught. "I'm sorry." She looked away. "Doesn't matter." A beat passed. He steadied himself. "What's your name?" "Ava." The name hit him like a hammer and a lifeline all at once. Ava. Alive. Standing in front of him. Lila gone. He wasn't ready. She wasn't ready. But fate was done waiting. Ethan stood there, frozen, as the girl turned her back and began dragging her bag of recyclables toward a nearby alley. The weight of the moment threatened to crush him. 7 years of longing and guilt clashed with the present reality. Ava was alive, but so much smaller, sadder, and more guarded than she ever should have been. He took a step forward. "Wait, Ava?" She paused, turning slowly. He cleared his throat, forcing calm into his voice. Would you let me buy you lunch?" Ava looked him up and down, skeptical. "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Because I think you've had a hard day, and maybe I could use the company." There was a long silence. Then, with a shrug that felt heavier than it should have been for a child, she said, "Fine, but I'm not going anywhere fancy. I don't like people staring." They ended up at a hole-in-the-wall diner a few blocks away. Greasy booths, chipped mugs, the smell of bacon grease clinging to the air. Ava slid into a corner seat and folded her arms, eyes constantly flicking toward the exit. Ethan sat across from her, unsure of how to breathe. She ordered pancakes. He got coffee. "So," she said flatly, stirring syrup into her water, "are you some kind of social worker?" Ethan almost choked. No, I'm not." "Then why are you talking to me?" He looked at her carefully, then said, "Because you remind me of someone. Someone I lost." Ava's expression didn't change, but her fingers paused over her fork. "My mom?" she asked, quieter now. She stared down at her plate. She was kind. Not stupid kind, but like good, even when people didn't deserve it. Ethan nodded. "That sounds like her. She used to sing when she did dishes, told me stories about oceans even though she'd never seen one. She said maybe one day, when things got better, we'd go." "Why didn't you?" She shrugged. "Life got in the way, I guess." Ethan watched her for a long moment, then whispered, "Do you miss her?" Ava looked up sharply. "Of course I do. She was my whole world." His chest cracked open. "I'm sorry," he said, barely managing the words. Ava narrowed her eyes. "Why? You didn't even know her." Ethan looked away, ashamed. "Not the way I should have." A moment passed. Then, suddenly, Ava leaned forward. "She told me never to trust people who show up when they feel guilty." Ethan looked back at her. She was right. "I'm not dumb," Ava added, her voice wavering now. "You don't just follow a kid to a diner because you're lonely. Who are you?" "I'm someone who should have been there," he said. "And I wasn't." Ava studied him, unsure if she wanted to scream or cry or bolt from the booth. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I can't explain everything right now, but I promise I will. I need time, and I need to make sure you're safe." "Safe?" she scoffed. "Safe is a myth, mister. I've been in 5 shelters in 3 years. You don't get to say stuff like that unless you mean it." "I do mean it." "Then prove it," she whispered fiercely. Ethan leaned forward, eyes stinging. "I will." Just then, their food arrived. Ava dug in, and for a moment the weight between them lifted. But the silence wasn't empty, it was charged, dense with unspoken truth. As they finished, Ethan asked gently, "Where are you staying now?" Ava wiped syrup from her chin. "Shelter off West Monroe. They rotate beds. If I'm lucky, I get top bunk." His throat tightened. "Do you have anyone? Anyone watching out for you?" She shook her head. "Not really. There was a lady named Miss Rita, but she moved away. Everyone else just passes through." Ethan pulled out his wallet, then paused. No, this wasn't about money. This was about trust. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and slid a small gold pin across the table. "This was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me the day I started my first company. I want you to hold on to it, just until I see you again." Veille stared at it. "Why?" "Because you deserve something real, something that doesn't disappear." Her hand closed around it slowly. "'Kay," she whispered. "But if you disappear too, I'm pawning it." Ethan chuckled, then stood. "Fair deal." He walked her back to the shelter, every step heavy with emotion. At the door, Ava turned. "Hey." "Yeah?" "You never told me your name." He smiled gently. "Ethan." "Ethan what?" "Just Ethan, for now." And with that, she nodded and disappeared inside. Ethan stood there for several minutes afterward, staring at the peeling paint of the shelter door, heart pounding. He had found her, and he would not lose her again. The morning after their diner conversation, Ethan sat at the edge of his bed, the soft morning light creeping in through the curtains. The gold pin his mother had once gifted him was no longer in his pocket. It was in Ava's hands now, the smallest gesture of trust he had to offer. He hadn't slept. His mind replayed her voice, her wary stare, her defiance wrapped around sadness she didn't yet know how to name. He picked up the phone. "Sam," he said, when his oldest friend answered groggily, "I need you." There was no hesitation. "Give me 30 minutes. Ethan had known Sam Patel since college. His most loyal friend, a former investigative journalist turned private investigator. If anyone could piece together the missing years of Lila and Ava's life, it was him. By noon, they were huddled in Ethan's office. A large corkboard quickly filled with pinned maps, shelter records, photos, and old digital copies of city archives. Sam scribbled notes, cross-referenced names, and tapped away at his laptop with rapid precision. Ethan hovered restlessly. "I need to know everything. From the moment they left until now. No gaps." Sam nodded. "We'll find it. But you've got to prepare yourself. This won't be clean." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't expect clean. I expect truth." By late afternoon, Sam uncovered an address, an old apartment in Bridgeport where Lila and Ava had lived until 3 years ago. He also flagged an accident report, a fatal car crash involving a woman matching Lila's description. The victim had no ID and was listed under a Jane Doe alias, but the vehicle registration had been to one name: Lila Nguyen. Ethan stared at the screen, throat constricting. "She's really gone," he whispered. Sam nodded, solemn. But Ava wasn't with her that day. She was listed in a child welfare report 3 days later, picked up alone, walking on a highway. Said she was going to find a man named Ethan. Ethan blinked back tears. She remembered. "She never forgot," Sam said gently. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I need to talk to someone who knew them. Someone from the past." That night, Ethan drove to the western edge of the city, stopping at a small nursing home nestled between a shuttered laundromat and an overgrown park. He stood at the front desk and asked for Maggie Walters. "Maggie?" the nurse said. "She doesn't get many visitors. Used to be a housekeeper. Sweet old thing." When Maggie saw him, her eyes widened. "You," she gasped. "Ethan Caldwell. You were Lila's." "I was supposed to be more," he said quietly. She motioned him inside. They sat in her small room, cluttered with framed photos of long-ago holidays and handwritten notes taped to the wall. She loved you, you know," Maggie said after a while. "She waited, she cried, but when the eviction notice came, your uncle said she had to go. She begged him to call you. He said you didn't want her." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "He lied to both of us. She left with nothing but a suitcase and that little girl on her hip. She said she'd figure it out." "And she did," Ethan murmured, "until the accident." Maggie nodded. Ava was her world. Lila always said she was born with her daddy's stubborn eyes. Ethan smiled bitterly. "I see them every time she looks at me." "Don't wait too long," Maggie said. "That girl's had to grow up too fast. If you want to be there, be there." He stood, swallowing hard. "Thank you for not forgetting her." Back in his car, Ethan dialed another number. "Detective Laura Monroe," the voice answered. "How can I help?" "This is Ethan Caldwell. I need access to the files on a Jane Doe accident case from 3 years ago. I'm her next of kin." There was a pause. "Give me a case number. I'll get it to you in 5 minutes." "And Ethan?" the detective added. "Yes?" "There's something strange about that file. It was sealed." "Sealed by who?" "A lawyer representing your family's estate. Name was Richard Caldwell." Ethan's blood ran cold. His uncle. Again. Ethan stood motionless outside the shelter's low cement wall, his thoughts a storm of fury and disbelief. Richard. Again. The man who had once smiled beside his father's casket, who had whispered condolences with poison on his breath, had sealed the truth of Lila's death, quietly snuffing out every trace of her story. All while Ethan drowned in his own assumptions and guilt. He swallowed hard and turned toward the shelter entrance. There was still one person who could help him feel her again. Ava. Inside the shelter cafeteria, the smell of old coffee and canned beans lingered in the air. Folding tables lined the walls, and chatter hummed in the background. He spotted her instantly, her red hoodie pulled over her head, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing trays at the sink. She worked with precision, lost in her task. "Ava," he called gently, stepping into her view. She looked up, startled, then relaxed as her eyes met his. "Oh, hey, Mr. Caldwell." Her voice was soft, guarded. "I was wondering," he began, trying to sound casual, "if you'd have lunch with me today, somewhere nearby, my treat." She hesitated, her hands still wet. "Is this about the cans? I wasn't stealing, I swear." He shook his head. "No, it's not about that. I just enjoyed talking to you, and I'd like to do it again." A long pause passed before she nodded once. "Okay, but I pick the place." 10 minutes later, they were at a tiny Vietnamese deli 2 blocks down. Ava ordered banh mi with extra pickled carrots and an iced coffee she insisted was more milk than caffeine. Ethan smiled, watching her. Sharp, resourceful, older than her years. She reminded him of Lila in ways that made his chest ache. "So," she said, chewing thoughtfully, "why are you really here?" Ethan didn't lie. "I knew your mom," he said slowly. "A long time ago. We were close." Ava looked at him, expression unreadable. She never talked much about people from before, just Maggie, and one friend named Emma, but I always got the feeling she was hiding something, or someone. "I think I was that someone," Ethan admitted. She blinked. "Were you her boyfriend?" His throat tightened. "Yes, and I should have stayed. I didn't." Ava looked away. She used to cry at night sometimes. I always pretended I didn't hear. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. "I'm sorry, Ava." Silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Ava asked, almost too casually, "Do you want to know how she died?" He nodded. "It was raining," she said, staring out the window. She was driving back from a job interview in Oak Lawn. A truck swerved into her lane. They said she died on impact. I was staying with Mrs. Green, our neighbor, that weekend. Mom promised she'd be back before dinner." She paused. "She never came back?" Ethan placed his hand on the table, open but not reaching. "I wish I'd found you sooner." Ava looked at him for a long time. "Why now?" "Because I finally stopped listening to the wrong people," he said. "And I saw you. Really saw you. You reminded me of her." She smiled faintly. "Everyone says I have her nose, but I got the eyes from my dad. That's what she used to say." His voice caught. "Yeah. You did." Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're him, aren't you?" Ethan's heart pounded. "Ava, you're my dad," she said, almost a whisper. He didn't deny it. Ava pushed her tray away quietly. "Why didn't you ever come for us?" "I didn't know," Ethan said hoarsely. "I thought she left me. I thought she didn't want me in your life. And then Richard—" "Your uncle?" He nodded. "He lied. To both of us." Ava's lips trembled, but her voice was firm. "I waited, you know. For years. I used to watch rich men on TV and wonder if maybe you were one of them." Ethan felt like the floor beneath him was crumbling. "I'll never be able to make up for the time I lost. But if you'll let me, I'll be here every single day going forward." She wiped her eyes angrily. "I don't want money." "I know," he said quietly. "I want to give you something else. A safe place, a family. Whatever I have, it's yours." She looked at him, raw and vulnerable. "Don't say it unless you mean it." "I mean it." A long beat passed. Then, slowly, Ava reached across the table and touched his hand. Not a full embrace, not a forgiveness, but a beginning. Ethan sat at the edge of his leather chair in the study, the fire in the hearth burning low behind him. The moment with Ava still lingered like smoke, bittersweet, real, and full of unspoken promises. She hadn't called him Dad, not yet, but her hand on his had been enough to know the door was cracked open. Now came the harder part, uncovering the rest of the truth. He reached for his phone and called the one person he trusted without question. "Sam," Ethan said the moment the line connected, "I need you." His longtime friend, now a private investigator, didn't hesitate. "Where?" "My place. Tonight." By dusk, Sam arrived. Graying at the temples, eyes sharp as ever. Ethan handed him a flash drive and a folder. "This has everything I've found. Lila's accident. The shelter Ava lives in. Records. But something doesn't add up." Sam flipped through the folder, his brow furrowed. "And you want me to look deeper? I want to know why she ended up there. Why she had to run. Why she thought she couldn't trust me." Ethan's voice faltered. "And I want to know what Richard did." Sam nodded grimly. "I'll start with the hospital logs, then dig into her employment history. Give me a few days." As Sam left, Ethan stared at the family portrait he kept buried behind his books, one of him and Lila during better times. He touched the edge of the frame, quietly whispering, "I am going to fix this." The next morning, Ethan took a different route to his office, stopping at a small home in the South Side. A wrinkled hand opened the door. "Maggie," he said gently. The former housekeeper's face lit with surprise, then softened. "Ethan Caldwell, I thought you'd never come. I need to talk to you. About Lila." Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old memories. Maggie poured tea, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred. "You were so in love," she said, eyes misty. "She loved you, too, until the day she died." Ethan bowed his head. "Then why did she leave?" Maggie hesitated. "Because Richard made her believe she had no choice." Ethan stiffened. "The day after your parents' funeral, he came to the house, said you needed space, that Lila was a distraction, that if she stayed, you'd cut her out entirely. He packed her things while she sobbed, told her she wasn't welcome, and she believed him." Ethan's stomach twisted. She didn't tell me any of this. She tried, Maggie whispered. She left a letter. Richard burned it. He sat back, stunned. He's done more than I realized. Maggie leaned forward. He threatened to ruin her. Said he'd frame her for stealing your mother's necklace if she didn't go quietly. She was scared, Ethan. Not just for herself, for Ava. Tears stung his eyes. Ava was already born? She was 3 months old, Maggie said softly, and the spitting image of you. Ethan buried his face in his hands. I should have known. You trusted the wrong man, she said gently. But you're here now. That counts. That night, Sam returned with findings. She changed her name to Lila Tran shortly after she left, moved 4 times in 5 years, always stayed under the radar, barely made enough to survive. Ethan swallowed. And the accident? Not random, Sam said. The truck that hit her belonged to a shell company tied to Richard's real estate fund. The driver fled the country 2 days after the crash. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He tried to have her killed, Sam nodded. And if you hadn't found Ava, he probably would have erased her too. Ethan rose from his chair, his voice trembling with fury. We bring it all down, every piece, every lie. Sam smiled grimly. Thought you'd say that. The next morning, Ethan returned to the shelter with 2 things. A notarized legal petition for Ava's guardianship and an invitation. Would you like to stay with me for a while? He asked Ava gently. Just try it, 1 day at a time. She looked up at him, her bag over one shoulder. Will there be pancakes? He smiled. There will be anything you want. She nodded. Later that night, Maggie came to visit the mansion. The moment Ava saw her, she dropped her fork and ran into her arms. Mama! Maggie! Ethan watched from the doorway, overwhelmed. He didn't have all the answers, not yet. But he had Ava. He had the truth, and soon he would have justice. He whispered to the night sky through the open window, I promise, Lila, I won't let him win. The early morning sun filtered through the towering windows of Ethan's estate, casting a soft golden light across the marble floors. But there was no peace in that light, only a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside him. In the quiet of his office, Ethan sat with a manila envelope in front of him. Sam had dropped it off before dawn. He hadn't said much, only, You need to read this alone. Ethan opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos, emails, transaction logs, all leading back to one man. Richard Caldwell. The same man who had cradled Ethan's shoulder at his parents' funeral, who'd promised to help him run the company, who had sent Lila away and fabricated a betrayal that never existed. The same man who had orchestrated the crash that killed the woman Ethan loved. Ethan's throat tightened as he read the details. A hired truck, a route altered at the last minute, an emergency repair order conveniently placed to avoid suspicion, a payout, just large enough to send a man overseas and buy his silence. But the worst was a video clip. Surveillance. Footage, grainy but clear enough. It showed Richard meeting with the driver at a gas station 2 days before the crash. He was handing over something, likely the envelope Sam had traced through the bank. Ethan slammed his fist against the desk. The rage that surged through him wasn't loud. It was deep, controlled, suffocating, and underneath it all was grief. Pure, bone-deep grief. He whispered, almost brokenly, You murdered her. Later that morning, Ethan sat on the edge of the couch while Ava played with her dolls nearby. She had created a tea party for 5, each doll with a name, a backstory, a favorite flavor of imaginary tea. Do you want to join us? She asked sweetly, offering him a chipped plastic cup. He took it with a trembling smile. I'd be honored. As they sipped in silence, Ava looked up at him. You're sad today. Ethan blinked. Why do you say that? Because your eyes are quiet. like Mama's were when she was trying to be strong. The words hit him harder than he expected. He swallowed. I miss someone very much, and I wish I could have saved her. Ava reached out and placed her tiny hand over his. Mama said saving someone doesn't always mean stopping something. Sometimes it just means being there for what comes next. Ethan fought to keep his composure. Your mom was the bravest person I've ever known. She told me you were brave too, Ava said gently, even when you didn't know it. He nodded, swallowing the emotion threatening to crack his voice. I'm going to make things right, Ava. For her, for you. That night, Ethan gathered his legal team and Sam in the living room. He laid out the evidence across the dining table like a war map. We need a plan, he said. Not just for justice, but for protection. Richard won't go down easily. His lawyer, Dana Marino, leaned forward. We take this to the state prosecutor and the media simultaneously. The moment Richard feels cornered, he'll try to strike back. We need to get ahead of him. Sam nodded. And I'll keep eyes on his movements. He's careful, but he's not invisible. Ethan turned to Dana. Get the documents prepped for formal charges. But before we go public, I want to confront him. Dana raised an eyebrow. That's dangerous. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. So is staying silent. The next morning, Ethan arrived unannounced at the Caldwell estate, the mansion his parents once owned, now fully under Richard's control. The staff hesitated before letting him in, their eyes full of whispered warnings they dared not voice aloud. Richard was in his study, sipping brandy before noon. He looked up, unsurprised. Well, the prodigal finally returns. Ethan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You lied to me. Richard's expression barely flickered. You'll have to be more specific. You lied about Lila. You had her thrown out. You threatened her. And you... Ethan's voice cracked with fury. You killed her. Richard leaned back, feigning boredom. You're letting grief cloud your mind. Ethan pulled out his phone and pressed play. The surveillance clip played in silence on the screen. Richard went still. That's you, Ethan whispered. And this, he held up a printed log, is the payment you authorized. We have everything, Richard. For a moment, Richard's facade dropped. You always were too sentimental. That's why you were never going to survive in this world. Ethan stepped closer. No, I survived despite you. And now, I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again. By the time Ethan returned home, Dana had sent the evidence to the district attorney. Sam confirmed Richard's passport was flagged. He wasn't going anywhere. Ava met him at the door with a handmade card. On the front was a drawing, stick figures under a big yellow sun. It read, Me and You. Inside, she had written in crooked letters, Thank you for being here. Ethan knelt, pulling her into a tight hug. Always, he whispered, I'm never leaving again. As the sun set behind them, Ethan knew the final battle was near, and he would fight it not just for justice, but for love, for legacy, and for the little girl who believed in him before he believed in himself. The soft hum of Ava's nighttime lullaby still lingered in Ethan's ears as he stepped quietly out of her room and closed the door behind him. The house was dim, calm. For the first time in years, it felt like a home again. But underneath the quiet, Ethan's heart was pounding. Sam's voice on the phone earlier had been low, urgent. He knows, Ethan. Richard knows you went to the authorities. I don't know what he's planning, but it's happening soon. Ethan had nodded grimly. Let him come. Downstairs, in the living room, the security team reviewed footage from the past 2 days. The new cameras installed around the property showed nothing unusual. But Ethan knew Richard wouldn't act through anything that could be traced. He'd use someone desperate, someone expendable. The house was locked, guarded, monitored. Still, Ethan couldn't sleep. Not with the weight of what he knew, not with the fear that Richard's evil hadn't yet fully revealed itself. The trap was sprung 3 nights later. It began with a distraction. The perimeter alarm triggered by a delivery van that wasn't on the schedule. As the guards investigated, a shadow slipped through the side hedges, scaling the fence with practiced ease. Inside, Ava was asleep in her bed, her favorite plush bunny tucked under her arm. The intruder crept through the service hallway, masked, gloved, silent. Ethan, alerted through his private line from a security guard's panicked whisper, "Sir, we've got movement inside, unauthorized," bolted from his room barefoot, adrenaline already coursing through him. He didn't hesitate. He ran straight for Ava's room. The man reached her door, slowly twisting the knob. The light from the hallway flickered just enough to show the glint of something metallic in his hand. But before he could step inside, a voice rang out sharply from the far end of the hallway. "Don't take another step." The man froze. Ethan stood there, a baseball bat in his hands, eyes wild, chest heaving. "I don't know who sent you," he growled, "but if you take one more step toward her—" The intruder lunged. Ethan swung. The bat cracked against the man's arm. He yelped in pain, slashing the air with the small blade in his hand. Ethan ducked, tackled him into the wall, and they both crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and rage. The door flew open. Ava's eyes wide in terror. "Daddy? Stay back!" Ethan yelled. 2 guards arrived seconds later, pinning the intruder and yanking off his mask. Sam burst in behind them. "Is she okay?" Ethan nodded, holding Ava to his chest. "She's okay. She's okay." The man on the floor sneered through a busted lip. "You think this ends with me?" Ethan stood, eyes blazing. "No, it ends with the man who sent you." Sam crouched and pulled a piece of paper from the man's pocket. Folded inside was a preloaded debit card and a printed message. "No loose ends. $50K wired once the girl is gone. RC." The next morning, Ethan walked into the Chicago District Attorney's office with Sam, the masked attacker in custody, and a file of evidence. "I want this man charged with attempted kidnapping," Ethan said flatly. "And I want Richard Caldwell indicted for conspiracy to commit murder." Within hours, the DA had reviewed the footage, the payment trail, and the statement from the attacker, who, after seeing the mountain of evidence, quickly flipped. "He told me to make it clean," the man confessed in interrogation. "Said the girl didn't belong with him, that she was just baggage. Said the guy would back off if I scared him enough." Ethan sat silently across the one-way glass, fists clenched. But something inside him had shifted. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about protecting every child who had ever been treated like a pawn, about honoring Lila's memory, and about ensuring Ava never again had to sleep in fear. Later that night, Ethan tucked Ava in again. This time she reached for his hand before he could leave. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart? Was it someone bad?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. But he's not going to hurt anyone ever again." Ava looked up at him. "You stopped him?" Ethan's throat tightened. "With a little help, yes." Ava smiled faintly and pulled her bunny closer. "Then Mama would be proud of you." That broke him, not into tears, but into quiet strength, a deeper kind of resolve. He kissed her forehead gently and whispered, "I hope so." Outside her room, Sam waited. "You did the right thing," he said. Ethan shook his head. "We're not done. He doesn't just deserve prison. He deserves the truth to be broadcast. Every lie, every betrayal. The world should know what he did. And they will," Sam said, "tomorrow." By morning, every major news outlet had the story. Headlines exploded across screens. Tech billionaire targeted in family betrayal plot. Attempted kidnapping foiled. Suspect linked to Caldwell empire. Richard's face was plastered next to words like fraud, conspiracy, and arrest warrant issued. Ethan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, no longer dressing like a man hiding from grief, but like a man walking toward justice. He looked himself in the eyes and whispered, "I'm coming for you." The storm had finally gathered over the Caldwell estate, not in weather, but in consequence. As Ethan stepped through the iron gates of his family's ancestral home in Lake Bluff, a gust of wind caught his coat, billowing it like a banner behind him. He barely noticed. His mind was locked on one name, one betrayal, one final reckoning. Richard Caldwell. Inside, the mansion remained as lavish and cold as ever. Marble floors, oil paintings of smug ancestors, chandeliers too bright and too clean. Ethan had once admired this place, until he realized it had been built on silence and shadows. Today, he would burn the silence down. Richard stood in the drawing room, a drink in his hand and a smirk on his lips, as if the news cycle meant nothing. As if Ethan's press release, the video confession from the would-be kidnapper, and the court-issued warrant were all a bluff. "You finally found your spine," Richard drawled. "Or was it your conscience?" Ethan didn't flinch. "You tried to have a child kidnapped," Richard scoffed. "Spare me your moral outrage. She's not even yours, biologically or legally." "She's mine in every way that matters," Ethan said, stepping forward. "And you're finished." Richard set his drink down slowly, deliberately. "You think the world cares about your sob story? It's business. You don't have what it takes. You never did." Ethan pulled a folder from his coat and tossed it onto the glass table between them. "That's every transaction you authorized in the last 5 years. Every offshore account, every threat, every bribe. You tried to erase Lila. You tried to erase Ava, but you left a trail." Richard's eyes narrowed. "I built this company," Richard hissed. "I made sure your inheritance didn't crumble the moment your parents died. You were too busy playing house with that girl." Ethan's jaw clenched, but his voice remained calm. "I've already given my full statement to the FBI. The man you hired gave his too. And this place, this illusion of power, it ends today." From the hallway, 2 federal agents appeared, flanked by Sam. "Richard Caldwell," the lead agent said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder." Richard lunged for the fireplace poker, a mad gleam in his eyes, but Ethan moved faster, grabbing his wrist and forcing it down with controlled fury. "No more lies," Ethan growled. "No more manipulation. You don't control me. You never did." The agents handcuffed Richard, reading his rights as he spat curses, still clinging to the idea that he could talk his way out of anything. But this time, there was no deal to be made, no silence to be bought, no threat that would make Ethan back down. Outside, reporters swarmed the front gate as Richard was led away in cuffs, his head low, the legacy he had clung to now shattered before the world. Ethan didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't need to. The truth was enough. He returned home that evening. Home, not mansion. A place filled with crayon drawings, storybooks, and the soft laughter of a girl who no longer feared the dark. Ava met him at the door, flinging her arms around his waist. "Did it work?" she whispered. Ethan knelt to her level. "It did. Is the bad man gone?" He nodded, pulling her close. "For good." Maggie stood nearby, watching them with misty eyes. "Lila would have been so proud," she said softly. Ethan smiled, but it wavered with emotion. "She still is." That night, they gathered in the living room. Sam, Maggie, Ava, and Ethan sat in a circle, each holding a candle as Ethan spoke. This family was built on love, not fear, not blood. Love. Ava looked up at him. "Are you still scared?" Ethan kissed her forehead. "Not anymore." The fire crackled. The shadows didn't feel as heavy now. He knew the past couldn't be changed. Lila was gone. Richard would never pay enough for what he'd taken, but Ava was here, and the life they had now, it was real, honest, earned. For the first time in years, Ethan slept through the night. And in the morning, with sunlight pouring through the windows, Ava woke him with a whisper. "Daddy, can we plant a garden for Mama?" Ethan nodded, tears stinging his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll plant everything she loved." Spring arrived in soft, deliberate waves. The trees in Ethan Caldwell's backyard had started to bud, pale green promises lining the edge of the old stone wall. On a Saturday morning in early May, Ava knelt in the freshly tilled soil beside her father, hands dirty and heart full. Her tiny fingers held a marigold seedling as if it were something sacred. "She liked these, didn't she?" Ava asked, glancing up. Ethan nodded, his voice catching. They were her favorite. She said they looked like sunlight even on rainy days. The garden was Ava's idea. A memorial, yes, but also a beginning. Maggie brought out lemonade. Sam stopped by with new gloves. And as they worked together, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, healing. The world hadn't changed overnight, but their world had. Ethan officially adopted Ava 2 weeks later. The ceremony was simple. Just a judge, some papers, and a tearful Maggie holding a bouquet of daisies. Ava clung to his arm the entire time, proud and protective. "You know what this means, right?" Ethan whispered as they stepped out into the courthouse hallway. "That you're my dad," she said, grinning. "No going back now," he teased gently. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo, the one of Lila holding her as a baby. "I think she'd be okay with it." Ethan took the picture and tucked it inside his coat, near his heart. "Me too, sweetheart." Weeks turned into months. Ethan stepped back from day-to-day control of Caldwell Enterprises, handing the reins to his COO, Monica Reyes, a sharp, empathetic leader he trusted completely. The headlines stopped swirling. The board calmed. Investors returned. He didn't miss the pressure. He missed Lila. But every morning with Ava made the ache a little easier to bear. They painted the garden fence together, went to museums, ate pancakes for dinner, and every night before bed, Ava would ask for a story about her mom, some small moment Ethan hadn't shared yet. She used to sing when she cooked, he told her one evening, badly, but with heart. Ava giggled. "Like me. Exactly like you." The Lila Foundation launched in the fall, its first grant helping a shelter for displaced single mothers in Uptown. Maggie, now board chair, worked tirelessly with Ethan to ensure every dollar went where it was needed most. "Lila would have run this place herself," Maggie said, standing in the freshly painted lobby. "She still does," Ethan replied, "in every decision we make." The Foundation's motto, "Because one moment of kindness can change a lifetime," was printed on every brochure. Ava helped design the logo, a marigold growing from the cracks of a sidewalk. "She always said people bloom in surprising places," Ava explained during the launch event. No one disagreed. On the anniversary of Lila's death, Ethan and Ava stood at her favorite overlook near Lake Michigan. They scattered petals into the wind and watched them drift across the waves. "She'd be proud of you," Ethan said softly. Ava leaned her head against his side. "She'd be proud of you too." He didn't answer, not with words, just a long, steady breath. Because the truth was, he was finally proud of himself. Not for the empire he'd built, not for the fortune he kept, but for showing up, for choosing love over fear, for becoming the father Lila believed he could be. That night, back home, Ethan tucked Ava in beneath her starry quilt. "Hey," she said sleepily, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "I don't get scared of the dark anymore, not since you came." Ethan brushed a curl from her forehead, blinking back tears. "I don't either," he whispered. As he turned out the light and stepped into the hallway, he paused at the photo wall. There was Lila, laughing in the sunlight, Ava cradled on her hip, a marigold behind her ear. Next to it, a new photo. The three of them, taken just last week in the garden. Ava smiling, Ethan holding her hand. Two portraits, two worlds, one family. The toy ring Lila once wore sat in a shadow box in Ethan's office, next to a plaque that read, "Love doesn't vanish, it just waits to be found again." And in the quiet of that home, where laughter echoed and the past no longer haunted the present, Ethan finally found what he had chased all his life. Peace. Not the kind you buy, not the kind you build, but the kind you grow, with patience, with pain, and with the relentless belief that even shattered stories can be rewritten with love.